All right, let's go on to chapter 4. Okay, the organization of musical sounds. Western music was based on an octave, remember that's 8 notes, equivalents. So if we named the pitches, which they are named, the letters of the alphabet, they would go A through G. There is no letter H in the musical alphabet. It goes only through G. Each of those letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, um, correlate to keys on the piano. There's certain pitches. Remember we talked about pitch being a certain number of also frequency of vibration. So I know this gets a little complicated, but if we looked at the keyboard, we would see that there are black notes and white notes. And there are some places, particularly within an octave, 2 different places, that there is not a black note between the white notes. So if we went from white note to black note to white note to black note, etc., we would count 12 different steps between the first C and then the subsequent C, the octave. They're called semitones or half steps. And so the half steps and the whole steps are what determine the type of scale that we have. Looking at a piano, if you touched every key and didn't skip one between C and C, so white, black, white, black, white, white, black, etc., that would be called the chromatic scale. There are 12 half steps in the chromatic scale. When you, for this class's purposes, when you touch a black note, for instance, that would be considered a sharp if you were going up from a white note to the black note. If you're going down, that would be called a flat. A sharp simply raises a tone by a half step, and a flat lowers the tone by a half step. If you had 2 half steps together, that indicates a whole step. You can see this on the piano here, illustrated a little bit more clearly. So we've got right here C, going up to the black note, C sharp. D, if we went down to that same black note, it would be D flat. So going up or going down determines whether it's flat or sharp. These are the 2 areas I was referring to here and here between C and C, the octave, that do not have a black note, okay? So every key that touches is a half step. Half step here, half step here, here, here. This is a half step, half step, half step, half step. See how that works? So if you go from white note here to white note here, you've skipped this black step, that's a whole step. This is what the chromatic scale looks like on the actual written staff. This is the note C. You can see it goes up a half step indicated by those sharps in front of the whole notes all the way up to the next C. Descending the chromatic scale, you would write flats because if you go down, you're going to be using the flat sign. Major and minor scales we mentioned in chapter 3, but those scales are made up of a certain pattern of whole and half steps. The major scale is ordered whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. For instance, let's look back to here. We've got from C to D, that's a whole because we're skipping that. D to E, whole, we're skipping that. E to F is half. Same thing, F to G is whole, 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 no black note here, that's a half. So if we were to play the white notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, straight up the scale, that's a major scale. All right. It has a happier sound, some may say cheerful, triumphant sound. That's the regular solfege scale. There's a little bit of tension that exists between the 7th and 8th pitch, that ti, ti, do. It's got that tension to resolution, that cadence kind of feel. The minor scale is a little bit different. Minor scale is a little darker, sadder sounding. The difference between the major and minor is that that third step, instead of being whole, whole, half, it's whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. So I know that looks a little bit confusing, but let's look here at the minor scale. So we've seen the major scale. This is the minor scale. Do, re, fa, sol, Sounds a little bit different with those flats there. All right. Whole, you've got a half, whole, whole, half, whole, and whole. All right. There is a basic progression of harmony that you'll hear in most music. Tonic, that's the do to the dominant, back to the tonic. So if we call the tonic the first note of do, the dominant is the fifth note, sol. That's what that means. The tonic 1 to 5 is a basic progression. That's a pretty common chord progression. This has to do with tonality, which we refer to as the key of a song or the key of the piece of music, which is going to tell you what scale it's organized around, specifically which tonic note it's organized around. So when we talk about tonality or the key, that's basically like telling us where do is. And so from about 1600 on, the basic principles of musical structure were based on key. That's continued on. That's not done, but it was, you're going to hear music that is referred to by its key, symphony in G flat major, something like that. Diatonic versus chromatic, those words, diatonic is when you can hear that the music is really clearly in the major key or the minor key. All right, so strong melody and harmony that's rooted in the key, very clear tonality. The center of the melody is that tonic note. All of the other harmonies and pitches are related to that tonic note or that home base. So the Baroque and classical eras that we will look at, they were largely diatonic. Chromatic, on the other hand, has all those half steps. All right. By the time we get to the Romantic era, people tried to break rules, try new things out. Chromaticism was a very different sound, and you'll get to be a little more familiar with that as you listen to music. Other scale types that we'll encounter are the 5-note scale, pentatonic scale, hence the pentatonic group got their name from that. The tritonic, which is not as common, but a 3-note pattern. You find that in some African cultures. Microtones, these are very, very hard to even find within the human ear, but you can do them much easier digitally. Okay, so it's less than a half step. The major minor system is going to have those triads, those 3-note chords built on scale steps. The tonic note, that's the first one that we call that a 1 chord. The dominant, remember we talked about the sol, that would be a 5 chord built on the 5th note of the scale. And the subdominant, which is built on the 4th scale step, or fa. Those are the most common ones, 1, 4, and 5. So very common to 4 can go to 1, 1 goes to 5, and then, or 1 goes to 4 and then to 5. Those are the progressions that are really common. Another key word, modulation, is when you shift to a different key during a composition. And transposition, when an entire work is written or set or moved to a new key. It's called a transposition. So modulation is when it shifts within the composition. A transposition is when you take a song and you move it completely to another key, much like putting a capo on a guitar. If it's not the right, pitch for you, you might put that capo on and it's going to shift that whole song to a new key.